The cameras started flashing before I even reached the courthouse steps. I counted them in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, a habit I'd developed over the past 5 years whenever anxiety tried to claw its way up my throat. 4 photographers, 2 video cameras, and what looked like a reporter from the local news station. All arranged by Patricia, no doubt. She wanted the world to see this. She wanted my humiliation documented, preserved, shared on social media, where her country club friends could watch me get torn apart in court. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed desperation or trying too hard. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and I carried a single folder thin, unremarkable. I looked exactly like what they expected, a woman about to lose everything. The courthouse doors felt heavier than they should have. Inside, the marble floors echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. My lawyer had told me to arrive 15 minutes early, but when I walked into courtroom 4B, Garrett's side was already full. Patricia sat in the front row behind the defendant's table, dressed in a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months. Her pearls caught the fluorescent light as she turned to watch me enter. That smile. God, that smile. It was the same one she'd given me at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every moment she'd reminded me I wasn't good enough for her son. Garrett sat beside his lawyer, Duncan Whitmore, at the polished wooden table. Duncan was exactly what you'd picture when you thought of a high-powered divorce attorney. Silver hair, expensive suit, cold eyes that calculated your worth in seconds. He had 3 leather folders stacked in front of him, each one thick with documents. Evidence, I assumed. Proof that I was a gold digger, a woman who'd married up and contributed nothing. Someone who deserved to walk away with nothing but her shame. Garrett didn't even look at me when I entered. He was scrolling through his phone, his jaw set in that particular way that meant he was annoyed. Probably annoyed that this was taking time away from his work, or from whoever he was sleeping with this month. His suit was tailored perfectly charcoal grey, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie. He looked every inch the successful real estate developer. The man who built things. The man who mattered. I sat down at my table, alone. My lawyer would arrive soon, they'd promised. I placed my thin folder on the table and folded my hands over it. Behind me, I could hear whispers. Patricia had brought friends. Of course she had. This was entertainment for them. The poor girl who'd trapped their golden boy finally getting what she deserved. All rise for the Honourable Judge Judith Green. Everyone stood. The rustling of fabric, the scraping of chairs, the collective intake of breath as the judge entered. She was smaller than I'd imagined from reading about her online, but there was something about the way she moved that commanded attention. Her dark robe swept behind her as she took her seat at the bench, and when she looked out at the courtroom, her eyes missed nothing. "Please be seated," she said, her voice calm but firm. Case number 2024DR8847. Foster versus Bennett. Are both parties present? Yes, Your Honour. Duncan Whitmore stood smoothly. Duncan Whitmore representing Garrett Foster. My lawyer, who had just slipped in through the back door, stood quickly. Leslie Chen, representing Clara Bennett. Your Honour, Judge Green nodded, making notes. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. I've reviewed the initial filings from both parties, and I expect this proceeding to be conducted with honesty and respect. I have no patience for theatrics or time wasting. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honour, both lawyers said in unison. Mr. Whitmore, you may begin. Duncan stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. He walked toward the centre of the courtroom like he owned it. Your Honour, this is a straightforward case. My client, Garrett Foster, entered into marriage with Clara Bennett 5 years ago, with genuine affection and hope for a future together. Unfortunately, that marriage has broken down irreparably. He paused, glancing back at me with something like pity. It was an act. Everything about Duncan Whitmore was an act. During their marriage, Mr. Foster built a successful real estate development company from the ground up. He worked 70, sometimes 80-hour weeks to provide a comfortable lifestyle for his wife. Miss Bennett, meanwhile, pursued what she called A freelance career from home, sporadic graphic design work that contributed minimally to the household income. I kept my face neutral. I'd practiced this. 5 years of practice, actually. Miss Bennet has filed for an equitable division of assets, claiming she's entitled to half of everything my client built through his hard work and sacrifice. Your Honour, the evidence will show that Miss Bennet married my client for financial security, contributed little to the marriage, and now seeks to profit from its dissolution. Patricia was nodding along in the front row. Her smile had grown wider. Garrett still hadn't looked at me. Duncan walked back to his table and lifted one of the thick folders. I have documentation here that shows the financial disparity between Mr. Whitmore, Judge Green interrupted, her voice cutting through his presentation like a knife. Before you continue, I have a question for your client. Duncan paused, momentarily thrown off balance. Of course, Your Honour. Judge Green looked directly at Garrett. Mr. Foster, can you explain the property deed for 847 Riverside Commercial Plaza? The courtroom went quiet. That particular kind of quiet that happens when everyone stops breathing at the same time. I watched Garrett's face. I'd memorized every expression he had over 5 years, the one he used for business associates, the one for his mother, the one he'd used on me when we were alone, and he wanted me to feel small. But this expression was new. His eyebrows drew together slightly. His jaw tightened. His hand, which had been resting casually on the table, curled into a fist. I'm sorry, Your Honour. His voice was steady, but I caught the slight uptick at the end. Confusion. Maybe the first whisper of concern. The property at 847 Riverside Commercial Plaza, Judge Green repeated, looking down at papers on her bench. Can you explain the ownership structure of that property and when it was acquired? Patricia's smile faltered. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the crack in her mask. Duncan Whitmore's face had gone pale. Actually pale. The confident attorney who'd walked into this courtroom ready to destroy me now looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. Your Honour, Duncan said, his voice careful now, measured. I'm not sure I understand the relevance of... The relevance will become clear, Mr. Whitmore, Judge Green said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mr. Foster, I'm waiting for an answer. Garrett glanced at Duncan, then at his mother, then finally at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. In that moment, I saw it happen. The realization, the understanding that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong with his plan. That property was purchased through my company, Garrett said slowly. About 3 years ago, if I'm remembering correctly. And who is listed as the primary owner on the deed, Mr. Foster? The silence stretched. Someone coughed in the back of the courtroom. Patricia had stopped smiling entirely now. Her hand clutched her pearls like they might save her. I'd need to review the specific documentation, Your Honour, Garrett said. Then let me refresh your memory, Judge Green said, lifting a paper from her bench. According to the deed filed with the county, the property is listed under your wife's name, Clara Bennet. A property purchased for $2.3 million, placed entirely in her name. With your signature on the transfer documents. Duncan Whitmore stood abruptly. Your Honour, I'd like to request a sidebar immediately. Request denied, Judge Green said calmly. Mr. Foster, did you put a $2.3 million property in your wife's name? The courtroom erupted in whispers. 5 years earlier, I stood in the bridal suite of the Rosewood Hotel, staring at myself in the mirror while 3 women I barely knew adjusted my veil. The dress was beautiful. I had to admit that. Ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, fitted perfectly because Patricia had insisted on taking me to her personal seamstress. She'd paid for the dress too, which meant she'd chosen it. Not too modern, not too traditional. Elegant, but not attention-seeking. Exactly the kind of dress a woman marrying above her station should wear. You look perfect, my maid of honor whispered. Ashley was my only real friend in the room. The other 2 bridesmaids were Garrett's cousins, girls who'd barely spoken to me during the engagement. I did look perfect. That was the problem. I looked like someone else entirely. Garrett and I had met at a coffee shop 2 years before the wedding. I'd been working on a logo design for a local bakery, my laptop spread across a corner table, when he'd asked if he could share the outlet. He was charming. Funny, he asked about my work with genuine interest, or what seemed like genuine interest. When he asked for my number, I'd felt something flutter in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The first 6 months were wonderful. He took me to nice restaurants, listened when I talked about my design projects, introduced me to his friends. When he proposed on a beach in California, I'd cried happy tears. Real ones. Then I met Patricia. The first dinner at the foster family estate was 3 weeks after the engagement. The house was massive. White columns, manicured gardens, a driveway that seemed to go on forever. Patricia greeted us at the door in clothes that probably cost more than my car. "So you're the graphic designer," she'd said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. How quaint. Throughout dinner, she'd asked questions that sounded polite but landed like small cuts. Where did your family live? What did your father do? Community college before state school? How practical. Did you grow up in a house or an apartment? Garrett had squeezed my hand under the table, and I'd told myself his mother just needed time to warm up to me. I was so stupid. The wedding was beautiful, expensive, and exactly what Patricia wanted. 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. A string quartet. Flowers shipped in from Ecuador. I'd wanted something smaller, more intimate. But Patricia had explained in that patient voice she used when speaking to children that the foster family had a reputation to maintain. Our honeymoon in Greece should have been perfect. Garrett spent most of it on his phone, dealing with work emergencies that couldn't wait. When I suggested we explore the island together, he'd sighed and said I didn't understand how hard he worked to afford trips like this. It was a small thing, easy to dismiss. I dismissed it. The first year of marriage was an education in becoming invisible. We moved into a house Garrett had chosen, a modern 4-bedroom in an expensive neighborhood. Patricia had decorated most of it before we even moved in, saying she wanted to help us get settled. My suggestions were met with tight smiles and gentle redirections. The throw pillows I'd bought were too colorful. The artwork I'd chosen was too abstract. Eventually, I stopped suggesting anything at all. Garrett's work consumed him. 70-hour weeks, he'd said in court today. And that part was true. He was building his real estate development company, and it required everything he had. I understood that. I tried to be supportive, but supportive was never enough. "Did you really burn the roast?" he'd asked one evening, standing in our kitchen, staring at the dinner I'd spent 3 hours preparing. "My mother makes this perfectly every time." "I followed the recipe exactly," I'd said quietly. "Maybe cooking isn't your strength," he'd replied, already pulling out his phone to order takeout. "Stick to your little computer projects." My little computer projects. That's what he called them. Never my work, never my career. Just little projects I did to keep myself busy. Patricia visited every Thursday. She'd let herself in with the key Garrett had given her, always arriving just after lunch. She'd walk through the house, running her finger along surfaces, rearranging things, offering advice I never asked for. "The living room feels cluttered, dear. Less is more. Those pants are a bit snug, aren't they?" Garrett's father always appreciated when I kept my figure. "You really should learn to make his favorite meals. A wife who can't cook is such a burden." I started keeping my design work hidden when she visited. The one time she'd seen my portfolio open on my laptop, she'd actually laughed, and said how nice it was that I had hobbies. 9 months into the marriage, I found the first message. Garrett had left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered. It lit up with a text preview. Just a glimpse, but enough. "Last night was amazing. When can I see you again?" The sender's name was Brooke, with a heart emoji. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I knew his passcode, our wedding date. I opened the message thread and scrolled up. Weeks of messages, flirtations, plans to meet, photos I couldn't bring myself to look at too closely. I heard the shower turn off. I put the phone back exactly where it had been, walked downstairs, and sat on the couch in our perfectly decorated living room. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something else. Something calculating. When Garrett came downstairs, hair still damp, I asked him how his day had been. "Exhausting," he'd said, not looking up from his phone, the phone full of messages from Brooke. "I've got another late meeting tomorrow night." "Okay," I'd said. I'll save you dinner. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into our home office and created a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Garden Plans, because Garrett never paid attention to anything I worked on. Inside that folder, I created a document and titled it Timeline. I wrote down the date, the name, Brooke, screenshots of every message I could remember. Then, I went back to bed and lay next to my husband, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs exactly how he liked them. Coffee with cream, no sugar. I kissed him goodbye when he left for work. Then I sat down at my computer and started researching divorce lawyers. Not to hire, not yet, just to understand, to learn what evidence mattered, what courts cared about, how to protect myself. I found forums where people shared their stories. Women who'd lost everything because they hadn't been prepared. Men who'd hidden assets successfully. Lawyers who explained the importance of documentation, of paper trails, of proof. I learned that in our state, infidelity didn't matter much in divorce proceedings unless you could prove it cost marital assets. I learned about community property, about how businesses were valued, about hidden accounts and asset protection strategies. I became a student of divorce law without ever consulting a single lawyer. 3 weeks later, Patricia came for her Thursday visit. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets and told me that Garrett had seemed stressed lately, that I needed to be more attentive to his needs, that marriage required sacrifice. I smiled and nodded and offered her tea. After she left, I added her comments to my timeline. I started a new document, Patricia Foster, Interactions and Interference. I was done being invisible. I was going to disappear completely until the moment I chose to be seen. The second year of marriage was when I perfected the act. I became quieter, softer. I stopped arguing about the small things, where we spent holidays, which friends we saw, how Patricia rearranged my furniture every week. Garrett noticed the change and seemed pleased. His mother commented that I was finally settling into the role of a foster wife. They had no idea I was building a case against them, one carefully documented piece at a time. Brooke lasted 4 months before Garrett moved on to someone new. I knew the exact day it ended because the message frequency changed. Brooke's texts went from daily to desperate to nothing. Then a new name appeared, Vanessa. Vanessa worked in commercial property management. She was blonde, ambitious, and 13 years younger than me. Garrett took longer lunch breaks. He started going to the gym more often, which would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. I photographed every receipt he left lying around. I noted every late night at the office, every unexplained charge on our credit card statements. The garden plans folder on my laptop grew thicker, but the affairs were just the surface. What I discovered underneath was so much worse. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Garrett's home office shared a wall with our bedroom. The insulation was good, but not perfect. One night, around 11, I woke up to use the bathroom and heard his voice through the wall. He was on the phone, and he sounded angry. "I don't care what it takes. Make the paperwork disappear. We can't have the city finding out about the inspection reports." I stood completely still, in the darkness, barely breathing. The foundation issues on the Riverside project aren't my problem once the units sell. That's why we form the LLCs, remember? Limited liability means limited liability. Riverside. I knew that project. He'd been working on it for 8 months, a commercial development downtown. He'd mentioned it was his biggest deal yet. I crept closer to the wall. "Just get me clean documentation showing the inspections passed. I don't care if you have to pay off the inspector. We close in 2 weeks and I've got buyers lined up who don't ask questions." My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't an affair. This was fraud. After he hung up, I waited 30 minutes before going back to bed. Garrett came in 20 minutes later, sliding under the covers without a word. I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I went to the public library. I didn't want to research this on our home computer or my phone. I needed to be careful. I used a public computer to search property records, LLC filings, inspection reports. It took me 3 days of research to understand what Garrett was doing. He'd created a web of limited liability companies, each one registered under slightly different names, each one holding a single property. When he bought properties, he'd get minimal inspections done, forge documents showing everything was fine, then flip them quickly to buyers who trusted the paperwork. By the time the real problems surfaced, the LLC would be dissolved, and Garrett would be untouchable. It was clever. It was also completely illegal. The Riverside Commercial Plaza was the biggest project yet. A $2.3 million property with significant foundation issues that Garrett was covering up. I found the original inspection report buried in public records, the one that said the building needed extensive structural work before it could be safely occupied. That report had disappeared from the official city files. In its place was a glowing inspection, showing everything was perfect. I printed everything at the library. I paid cash. I drove to a storage unit I'd rented 3 towns over, using money from small design jobs Garrett didn't know about, and I locked the documents inside. Then I went home and made dinner. Patricia came by that Thursday with news. She was glowing with pride, practically vibrating with excitement. Garrett told me about the Riverside deal, she said, sipping the tea I'd prepared. $2.3 million. Can you imagine? I always knew my son would do great things. It's impressive, I said quietly, folding napkins that didn't need folding. You know, dear, you really should take more interest in his business. A wife should understand what her husband does. She paused, giving me that smile. Though I suppose numbers aren't really your thing. Are they? I suppose not, I said. What she didn't know was that I'd become very good with numbers. I'd taught myself to read financial statements, to trace money through shell companies, to spot irregularities in tax documents. I'd spent hours online, learning from forensic accountants who wrote blogs, from legal forums, from court cases similar to what I suspected Garrett was doing. I'd also done something else, something that would make all the difference. 2 weeks after I'd overheard Garrett's phone call, I contacted someone he'd screwed over years ago, a man named Leo Pritchard. Leo had been Garrett's business partner in the early days of the company. They'd had a falling out over ethical differences, which I now understood meant Leo hadn't wanted to commit fraud. Garrett had forced him out, kept all the assets, and left Leo with nothing but legal bills. I found Leo through public records of their dissolved partnership. I sent him an email from an encrypted account, asking if he'd be willing to talk about Garrett's business practices. I didn't identify myself. I said I was a concerned party gathering information. We met at a diner 40 minutes from my house. Leo was in his 50s, tired-looking, wearing a work jacket that had seen better days. When I sat down across from him, he studied my face for a long moment. "You're the wife," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "He's doing it again, isn't he? The fake inspections, the shell companies." "Yes," I said. "Worse than before, I think." Leo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He nearly destroyed me, cost me everything. My reputation, my savings, my marriage, and Patricia helped him do it. She had connections at the city planning office. Smoothed things over whenever questions came up about his projects. I took notes. Leo talked for 2 hours, explaining how the system worked, giving me names of inspectors who'd been bribed, officials Patricia had influenced. He had documentation, 2 old files he'd kept from their partnership, evidence he'd gathered during their legal battle but never got to use because Garrett settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. "Why are you helping me?" I asked finally. "Because someone needs to stop him before he hurts more people. Those buildings he's selling, they're dangerous. Corners cut everywhere. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." Leo pushed a thumb drive across the table. "Everything I've got is on here. Use it however you need to." I took the drive. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Going up against the Fosters isn't easy. They've got money, connections, lawyers. Patricia's got half the city in her pocket." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm being careful." The next step was finding a forensic accountant. Someone discreet. Someone who could trace Garrett's money without alerting him. I found her through an online network of professionals who specialized in divorce cases, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who worked independently and had a reputation for being thorough and silent. I paid her in cash, from the account Garrett didn't know existed. The question hung in the courtroom like smoke after an explosion. Mr. Foster, did you put a $2.3 million property in your wife's name? I watched Garrett's throat work as he swallowed. His eyes darted to Duncan, then to Patricia, then back to the judge. He was calculating, trying to figure out how much Judge Green knew, how much damage control he could do. Your Honor, Duncan interjected, standing so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. I really must insist on a sidebar. This line of questioning is highly irregular and— Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Judge Green's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I'll determine what's irregular in my courtroom. Mr. Foster, answer the question. Garrett cleared his throat. The property was purchased as an investment. Sometimes in real estate, we structure ownership in different ways for tax purposes and— That's not what I asked. Did you place the property solely in your wife's name? Yes or no? The silence stretched. I could hear someone's phone buzzing in the back row. Patricia's breathing had gone shallow. Yes, Garrett finally said. But it was a business decision. Clara had no involvement in— No involvement? Judge Green interrupted. She lifted several papers from her bench. According to the deed filed with the county recorder's office, Clara Bennett's signature appears on the purchase agreement, the title transfer, and the ownership documents. Are you claiming these aren't her signatures? I knew exactly where this was going. So did Garrett, based on the way colour was draining from his face. I may have signed some documents on her behalf, Garrett said carefully. With her permission, of course. She understood it was for our financial benefit. Judge Green looked directly at me for the first time. Miss Bennett, did you give your husband permission to sign your name on documents related to the Riverside Commercial Plaza property? This was it. 5 years of waiting, documenting, planning. 5 years of being invisible. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom on me. No, Your Honor, I never gave him permission. I didn't even know the property existed until 2 years ago. The courtroom erupted. Whispers became voices, voices became noise. Patricia made a sound like a strangled gasp. Duncan was on his feet again, objecting, but Judge Green silenced him with a single look. Order, she said, her gavel coming down once. The room went quiet. Miss Bennett, you're saying your husband forged your signature? Yes, Your Honor. Duncan's face had gone from pale to almost grey. He leaned down, whispering urgently to Garrett, who was shaking his head. His jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscle jumping. Your Honor, Duncan tried again. His voice strained now, lacking the smooth confidence from earlier. My client may have made an administrative error in judgment, but I assure you there was no malicious intent. This was a matter of convenience in a marriage, not. Forgery is forgery, Mr. Whitmore, regardless of marital status. Judge Green turned to my lawyer. Miss Chen, do you have evidence supporting your client's claim? Leslie stood, and I saw something flash across Garrett's face recognition. He knew her, or knew of her. She was one of the best forensic litigation attorneys in the state, specializing in financial fraud cases. I'd hired her 8 months ago, paying her retainer with money I'd carefully saved from design projects I'd never told Garrett about. Yes, Your Honor. We submitted our evidence package to the court 3 weeks ago. It includes a handwriting analysis from a certified expert comparing Miss Bennett's actual signature to the signatures on the Riverside documents. The expert's conclusion is definitive: the signatures were forged. Leslie walked forward, handing documents to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Green. We also have documentation showing that Miss Bennett was never informed of this property purchase, never received any financial disclosures about it, and never benefited from any income it generated. In fact, Your Honor, our investigation revealed something more troubling. This was the moment. The piece of information that would crack everything wide open. The Riverside Commercial Plaza was purchased using funds from questionable sources and then listed in Miss Bennett's name specifically to shield Mr. Foster from liability. The property has significant structural issues that were concealed through falsified inspection reports. Duncan shot to his feet. Objection! These are wild accusations without— I have the original inspection report right here, Leslie continued, her voice calm and steady. The one that shows the building has foundation problems requiring over $500,000 in repairs before it can be safely occupied. I also have the falsified report that was filed with the city showing the building passed all inspections, and I have documentation of payments made to Inspector Thomas Riley, who suddenly deposited $15,000 in cash the same week the false inspection report was filed. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. Judge Green was reading through the documents, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. "Mr. Whitmore, did you review any of this evidence before today?" Duncan's mouth opened and closed. "Your Honor, I was provided with discovery materials, but these particular documents weren't. They were submitted to this court 3 weeks ago through proper channels, with copies sent to your office via certified mail, signed for by your paralegal on November 18th. Judge Green held up a receipt. "Are you telling me you didn't review the evidence submitted by opposing counsel?" I almost felt sorry for Duncan. Almost. He'd built his reputation destroying people like me in court. He'd walked in here expecting an easy win, a scared woman with no resources. He hadn't bothered to look at what we'd filed because he was so certain of victory. There must have been a miscommunication in my office," Duncan stammered. "If I could have time to review." "You've had 3 weeks," Judge Green said coldly. "Miss Chen." "Continue." Leslie pulled out another folder. "The Riverside property isn't the only one, Your Honor. Over the past 4 years, Mr. Foster has placed 7 properties in his wife's name without her knowledge or consent. The total value exceeds $8 million. Each property was purchased through limited liability companies that were dissolved shortly after sale, and each property had similar issues with concealed structural or safety problems." I could see Garrett's hands shaking now. He was gripping the table edge, his knuckles white. Patricia had gone completely still in her seat behind him, her face frozen in an expression somewhere between shock and rage. "Mr. Foster was using his wife as an unknowing shield," Leslie continued. "If buyers discovered the problems and sued, the LLCs were already dissolved, and the properties were in Clara Bennett's name. He could claim she was the owner, that he had no knowledge or liability. It's a sophisticated fraud scheme that has been operating for years." Judge Green set down the papers. "Mr. Foster, I'm going to ask you again, and I strongly suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Did you forge your wife's signature on property documents?" Garrett looked at Duncan, who gave the smallest shake of his head, a lawyer's warning not to incriminate himself. But Garrett was trapped. If he denied it, the handwriting analysis would prove he was lying under oath. If he admitted it, he was confessing to fraud. I may have signed her name on some documents," Garrett said slowly, "but she was my wife. We were partners. Everything I did was for our benefit, for our future." "For your benefit," Judge Green corrected. "Miss Bennett saw none of the profits from these properties, correct?" "The money went into our joint accounts," Garrett protested. "She had access to—" "Your Honor," Leslie interrupted. "We have bank records showing that Mr. Foster actually deposited the proceeds into separate accounts that Miss Bennett had no access to. Accounts she didn't even know existed." Patricia finally found her voice. "This is absurd." She stood up, her pearls swinging as she gestured angrily. "My son would never—" "Mrs. Foster, sit down," Judge Green ordered. "One more outburst, and I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Patricia sat, but her face was red with fury. Judge Green turned back to Leslie. "You mentioned payments to a building inspector. Do you have evidence of other bribes or fraudulent activities?" "Yes, Your Honor. We have documentation of multiple payments to city officials, falsified inspection reports, and forged certifications across all 7 properties. We've also identified that Mrs. Patricia Foster used her connections and influence to facilitate several of these deals." Patricia was on her feet again before Judge Green could stop her. "That's a lie. I have never. My reputation in this community is beyond reproach, and I will not sit here while some opportunistic—" The gavel came down hard. "Mrs. Foster, you are in contempt. Bailiff, please escort her from the courtroom." "You can't do this!" Patricia's voice rose to a shriek as the bailiff approached. Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of connections I have in this city? I know exactly who you are, Judge Green said coldly. And right now, you're someone disrupting my courtroom. Remove her. I watched as Patricia was led out, still protesting, her cream Chanel suit looking suddenly less elegant and more ridiculous. She twisted back to look at Garrett, at me, her face contorted with rage and something else, fear. Real fear. The doors closed behind her. The courtroom had erupted into chaos. Reporters were typing frantically on their phones. Spectators were whispering, and I could see someone in the back row recording on their phone despite the no recording signs posted everywhere. Judge Green restored order with another strike of her gavel. Miss Chen, I want to see everything. Every document, every piece of evidence you have regarding these properties and the alleged fraud. Your Honor, we have it all prepared. Leslie walked forward with a file box I hadn't even noticed she'd brought in. It was heavy, I could tell by the way she carried it. 5 years of my life in one box. While the bailiff helped arrange the documents on a side table, I finally let myself look at Garrett. Really look at him. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not dismissal, not the cool indifference he'd perfected over 5 years. This was something raw and desperate. He was finally seeing me. Not the quiet wife who made dinner and stayed out of the way. Not the woman he could control and dismiss. He was seeing the person who'd been documenting every move, every mistake, every crime, while he'd thought she was too stupid to notice. How long? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known? I didn't answer. Judge Green was reading through documents now, her expression growing darker with each page. Mr. Whitmore, she said without looking up, I'm seeing evidence here of systematic fraud, forgery, bribery of public officials, and falsification of safety inspection reports. I'm also seeing what appears to be money laundering through shell companies. Would you like to revise your earlier statements about this being a straightforward divorce case? Duncan looked like he might be sick. Your Honor, I was not made aware of the full scope of my client did not disclose. That's not my problem, Counselor. Judge Green set down the papers and looked at Garrett. Mr. Foster, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. I'm also placing an immediate freeze on all assets connected to the 7 properties Miss Chen has identified, pending further investigation. You can't do that, Garrett said, his voice rising. Those are my businesses, Those are properties fraudulently placed in your wife's name to avoid liability, purchased with potentially illegal funds and connected to forged documents and bribery. I absolutely can freeze them. Leslie pulled out another folder. I knew what was coming next. This was the part that had taken the longest to document, the part that had hurt the most to discover. Your Honor, there's more. We have evidence of Mr. Foster's extramarital affairs spanning the entire length of the marriage. While we understand that infidelity alone isn't grounds for asset division in this state, the financial impact of these affairs is relevant. She laid out printed bank statements, credit card records, receipts. Mr. Foster spent marital funds on these affairs. Hotel rooms, jewelry, vacations, apartment rent for at least one woman. The total expenditure over 5 years exceeds $200,000 from joint accounts. I had every receipt, every hotel charge, every piece of jewelry he'd bought for women who weren't me. I'd found them in his email, in his credit card statements, in the glove compartment of his car, while he'd called my work little projects, while Patricia had criticized every meal I cooked, while they'd both made me feel worthless, I'd been building an archive of his betrayals. We also have recordings, Leslie continued. This made Garrett's head snap up. What recordings? Miss Bennett recorded several conversations over the past 2 years. Conversations where you discussed your fraudulent business practices, where you admitted to forging documents, where you planned how to structure deals to avoid legal liability. The night I'd heard him on the phone about the Riverside inspection wasn't the only time. I'd recorded dozens of conversations after that, sometimes through the wall. Sometimes on my phone left recording in my purse during his business meetings at our house. Sometimes on a small device I'd hidden in his office. I'd learned that in our state, only one party needed to consent to a recording. I was that party. Judge Green listened to 3 recordings. Garrett's voice filled the courtroom, casual and confident, discussing fraud like other people discussed grocery lists, talking about paying off inspectors, forging documents, using shell companies to avoid liability. In one recording, Patricia's voice appeared too, advising him on which city council members to approach, which officials were flexible about regulations. When the 3rd recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Duncan made one last attempt. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate recess so I can consult with my client about." Motion denied. Judge Green's voice was ice. "I've heard enough. Here's my ruling." Everyone leaned forward. "This marriage is dissolved effective immediately. Miss Bennett is awarded the primary residence, 50% of all legitimate marital assets, and spousal support of $8,000 per month for 5 years. The 7 properties fraudulently placed in her name will remain frozen pending criminal investigation. And Miss Bennett will not be held liable for any legal consequences arising from her husband's actions regarding those properties." Garrett made a sound like he'd been punched. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order. Mr. Foster and Patricia Foster are to have no contact with Miss Bennett. Given the severity of the fraud documented here, I'm also referring this matter not just to the district attorney, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Real estate fraud that crosses state lines falls under federal jurisdiction, and I believe that's the case with at least 3 of these properties." Through the window, I could see movement outside the courthouse. Police cars, federal vehicles. They'd been waiting. Judge Green looked at Garrett, and her expression held something like disgust. "Mr. Foster, you walked into this courtroom expecting to destroy your wife. Instead, you've destroyed yourself. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Everything happened at once. Duncan was trying to talk to Garrett, who was ignoring him, staring at me with that same shocked expression. Federal agents were entering the courtroom. Reporters were rushing for the doors. Leslie was gathering our documents, her face professionally neutral but her eyes bright with victory. 2 agents approached Garrett. "Mr. Foster, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. Am I under arrest?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Not at this time, but we strongly suggest you cooperate." They led him toward the door. He twisted back to look at me one more time. "Clara, you don't understand what you've done. Those properties, those deals, that was our future, our security." I stood up, gathering my thin folder. After 5 years of silence, of making myself small, of being invisible, I finally spoke the words I'd been saving. "No, Garrett, that was your crime spree. This is my future." I walked past him, past the agents, past Duncan, who was frantically making phone calls. In the hallway, Patricia was arguing with courthouse security, demanding to be let back in. When she saw me, her face twisted with pure hatred. "You vindictive you've ruined everything. Do you understand what you've done to this family?" I stopped, looked at her. This woman who'd spent 5 years making me feel worthless. "I documented everything," I said simply. "Every insult, every manipulation, every time you let yourself into my home and treated me like I didn't matter. It's all written down. And if you come near me again, my lawyer has instructions to file harassment charges." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. The cameras were still there, but now they were focused on the federal agents, on Garrett being led to an unmarked car for questioning, on Patricia shouting at anyone who would listen. No one was looking at me. I was invisible again, but this time, it was by choice.